how useful are sources B and C for an inquiry into the significance of the Munich Putsch? Explain your answer using sources B and C and your knowledge of the historical context. 8 marks. Here's the mark scheme for this question, which you can find out about in more detail in the overview video. But we do know that all 8 marks here are awarded for AO3, and that's your analysis and evaluation of source utility. All that means really is you making a judgment on how useful this source is to the inquiry that you've been given in the question. In order to make that judgment, you might focus on one of these things, so how accurate it might be, how reliable you think it is, any limitations, so things that it doesn't include or isn't really that helpful for, knowledge of the author which is given to you above the source, or valuable information offered by the source. If you can focus on maybe one or two of these to decide how useful the source is for your inquiry, it's a really easy way to score highly in AO3. That means that rather than just making an assertion, so saying this source is useful, you need to reason, you need to use one of these factors above to decide how useful the source is. You'll also be thinking about the content, so what the source actually says. You'll be thinking about the context, so what you know about when it was written or what it's written about. And provenance, so who wrote it, when did they write it, why did they write it, and so on. So just try and keep those things in mind. You don't have to talk about everything, but just try and keep them in mind to make sure that your answer is really nicely focused on utility. It's also important to remember that the question isn't asking you to compare source B and source C. In fact, you could actually talk about them separately. You've got to think about why B is useful and why C is useful, not if one is more useful than the other. Here are the bands for this question. Now you can see in order to score in the highest band, you need to show developed reasoning. So maybe you've used one of the factors that we listed above to make a judgment on how useful the source is and really clearly explain your thinking. You've also considered the provenance, so where the source came from, and how that might impact how useful the source is. You could also draw in some contextual knowledge, so stuff that you already know about the topic, to help you to interpret the source and make that judgment. Essentially, this question is all about stating how useful you think the source is, using the information given to you in the source and before it, and the information that you already have about the topic, to explain why you made that judgment. Showing that you can do this well is how you can score in the highest band. There are many points you could give when answering this question, so as long as what you say is relevant and correct, the examiner will award you some marks. But let's have a look at the mark scheme, which you can see is organised according to utility of the content of the source, so what does it actually say, utility of its provenance, so where does it come from, and its purpose, what it intends to do, and the utility of the source in relation to its historical context, which is where you bring in evidence from your own knowledge to explain the content of the source. So let's have a look at content first. One point might have been that Stresemann highlights the importance of democracy in the Weimar Republic and how the putsch threatened this. In terms of its provenance and purpose, you might say that it offers a very valuable perspective from Stresemann himself, showing his concerns. The urgency with which he deals with the Munich Putsch suggests that he had to take it very seriously. Finally, in terms of context, you might say that the putsch took place during the hyperinflation crisis, which Hitler attained to take advantage of in order to pressurise the Weimar government. So if you can find a way of weaving together all three of those factors, you've got a really nicely developed point which shows that you've thought carefully about the question and that you know the topic really well. And it's that kind of answer which can help to secure you in the top bands. Take a look at the rest of the points here though to see if there's anything else you might have added to your answer, along with source C.